Welcome, one and all, to the award-winning podcast and radio show, the Pastors of Pain. We're just two awesome holy priests here, just waiting for the canonization process to begin, leading the church to holiness in Payne County. Father Kerry, I'm the pastor of St. John Catholic Student Center on the corner of Miller and Knobloch, and I'm here with part of the huge, except for this past summer, my sidekick, friend, house roommate, house resident, Father Brian O'Brien.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, man.
So there's a funny
football game.
Sorry, it was rough.
Dump in there.
There's a feature on the Facebook that is called Memories.
Oh yeah,
Memories. And so every day you can see like what you posted a year ago and 5 years ago. It's fascinating, and I really like it. I'm a person who I like occasions. I like being Catholic.
Remember?
I like the liturgical calendar.
Okay.
I like that we celebrate like the 500th anniversary of this or that, or today is the 473rd anniversary of the death of this saint. I love that stuff.
Whoa.
Well, anyway,
this is like coming out of nowhere.
It's not coming out of nowhere.
You've been waiting for this all day.
No, we just sat down, put our headphones on.
And this came out of your...
I think it was yesterday, one of these days, this week. And one of the memories was, like every week I post this podcast, right? Because it's podcast. It's also on the radio on Sunday mornings, 9:30 on Pete 94.3. But then we put it out, like on our parish Facebook. You put it out on your parish Facebook, Twitter. We kind of spread the word. Anyway, so one of the memories it was from 3 years ago. And it was the podcast that we did 3 years ago, yesterday. And it was about your plans to build a new church. And so I was driving. Where was I driving? I don't remember. Anyway, I listened to it.
What? Really?
And it was so fun.
Okay,
it was like you being like, yeah, we're about a year away from starting construction. And the building is going to be based on, this church in Milan, and it's going to have this, and it's going to have all this space, and it's going to look different from the current church. And it was just fascinating to hear. It was a little Back to the Future
slice of the past.
But hearing you say, but man, oh my gosh, I have to get on the road a lot. We have to raise a lot of money. I really hope people get behind it and support it.
Yeah, and it's.
Anyway, it was fun.
Since then,
and I was thinking of last week you had Dr. Ed Shree.
Oh yeah, Dr. Ed Shree from the Augustine Institute Focus
Denver,
guy.
And you invited us over, the unwanteds, the untouchables. You invited us over, and it was a very nice event. But it was the first time I had been to a St. John's event. That was just like, a normal event. And there was several hundred students.
Yeah,
all eating dinner and just a good vibe in the place.
168 of them.
And then Dr. Shree gave his talk and Anyway, it was fun to kind of put all that together, going to that event and then hearing you 3 years ago talk about trying to bring this thing to life, and then you brought it to life.
Yeah. Well, this past, the rest in peace, the game against the school that shall not be named.
You're not supposed to lose to directional schools. That's the rule.
Southern Alabama. Anyway,
they're pretty good. They're pretty good.
Oh,
but anyway, we digress.
Anyway, so when we were doing all that design stuff, we said well, what'd be great is if we had tailgates and then people would tailgate around here that were friends of St. John. They would park here. They'd share life together, cook out, and do all that stuff. And that weekend, there were 500 people tailgating in front of the St. John. There were like 10 tailgates. And
is that more or less than you expected?
we had no idea what to account for because our first tailgate in football season of 2017 when I got here, we had 10 students in a 10 by 10 tent.
Oh,
and we cooked.
Everyone got a square foot.
Everybody got a square foot. Yeah, we had chairs around, and I made some burgers, and
actually everybody got 10 square feet. But okay.
So everybody got
Wow.
So just to see that difference, like Dr. Ed Cherie, if we had given that same talk at Old St. John.
Where would you have done it?
Well,
in the church, probably.
Well, there were people from, the other school down I-35. What's that place?
Yeah, you people.
Oh, yeah, Norman.
They were sitting in the front row.
Well, I invited them up because you have to invite up, you have to bring your enemies to the front so you know what they look like.
Yeah.
And then
you always want to be facing the door so that you can, so you don't get shot in the back.
Yeah. That's right. And then our little bitty brothers from Edmond, from UCO, that we give a handout to occasionally. It's like, come on up here. Come on, you can have a seat at the table. They came up as well.
Because they have nice focus missionaries. That's good hospitality.
Yeah, they have focus missionaries down there, focus missionaries in Norman. But anyway, our old parish hall would have only seated 120 people at a table for dinner. And I think there was 140 plates of food served. And there were 168 students there, almost 170.
That was very nice.
Yeah, that was super great. Well, just wicked cool stuff. Okay, so what's on?
We were going to talk about forgiveness.
Do you remember?
Do you want to?
Oh, do I want to? Yeah.
So with the context is the gospel last weekend.
When we started this podcast, we wanted to make sure that we met the needs of the people of Stillwater, our parishes.
Stillwater and surrounding communities.
Yes, and then Stillwater, and then the world. So
we don't care so much about the world.
And you can't include everything in a homily. And that's what we discussed. Like, you can't get this in a homily. You can't get this all in a talk. But the idea of forgiveness, because in the last couple of weeks, we've had these gospels, and they have been bone crunching.
Fire, as the kids say.
Yeah. So a couple weeks ago, it was if your brother or sister sins against you, go tell them, and then bring it to the church, and then bring it to us. And then the next gospel was, it's all what I find interesting, and for you all at home, Catholics sitting in the pews, is one of the things I love when preparing for a homily. Is, okay, where does this gospel in place of last Sunday's gospel? And we had the keys of the kingdom.
Matthew 16.
We had Jesus calling Peter Satan.
Matthew 16.
We had Jesus saying, go correct your brothers and sisters who sin against you. And then we had this past Sunday,
Matthew 18.
Yeah. So we had all of these gospels. There were two together and then two together. And the churches, by putting them back to back with each other, are telling us, like, hey, listen here. Achtung bitte.
These go together.
Ten cuidado. Like, pay attention to this stuff. These things are important. In our life right now. And so the way I preached on it the last couple of weeks is, these aren't just isolated things that either Jesus is teaching or the church wants us to know. It's preparing us for heaven. So we have these gospels teaching us about forgiveness, of how many times we're supposed to forgive. Peter says, well, the law says 3. I'm going to go 7. I'm going to double it. What do you say, Jesus? And Jesus says not only 7 times, but 77 times. That's why the kingdom of heaven, and that's what all these are about what is heaven going to be like? But also, how are you preparing for heaven? How are we preparing for heaven? And so at the heart of this is forgiving the other, which I don't like to do.
Yeah, it's very hard. So
that's all you got is it's very whoa. It's pretty hard.
And thank you for joining us. When Jesus talks about, Jesus says some things that are that you kind of think are impossible. I've thought over the years, Jesus, you are asking me to do something. You're telling me that I have to do this, and I'm incapable of doing this, and that's not fair.
Right.
If I said to you, I need you to lift my car over your head, you have to, or we're not friends anymore. I'm asking you to do something you can't do.
That's right.
And that's not fair. And so it's been just a sort of a back and forth with the Lord, just in prayer of like, and I've thought about it just in the life of a priest, like, gosh, you want me to do that? I don't think I'm capable of that. And then what I find out is if I'm humble enough, and we've kind of put our gifts and talents at the service of the Lord, I find out that I'm actually like more capable of things than I thought I was. And so when Jesus says things like, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect, I've often thought over the years, maybe you have too, or people listening, whatever, I've thought, Jesus, you shouldn't say that, because that's you're asking me to do something I can't do. When he says to the woman, go and sin no more, I've thought to myself, and I do, and like when I go to confession, part of going to confession is when you make an act of contrition. My God, I'm sorry for my sins with all my heart. In choosing to do wrong and failing to do good, I have sinned against you, whom I should love above all things. I firmly intend with your help. And basically then we say, I firmly intend with your help to not sin anymore. Jesus says, go and sin no more. And I've thought to myself, do I really mean that? Like, am I really capable of not sinning anymore? Really? Jesus, your expectations are too high. But then it's important then to think about heaven and like striving for heaven. And so anyway, all that in light of, we get this gospel this weekend. It's Matthew 18, and Peter says, I'll read it for you. I got my
right on the Ignatius Press Bible.
Here we go. So this is Matthew 18, verse 21. Then Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? And you put yourself in Peter's shoes. Like, Peter's like going high.
Yeah,
Peter's
3 double.
Peter's like, something crazy, like 7. And Jesus says, verse 22, Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 70 times 7. Depending on translation, or 77 times.
Yeah.
And you read that and you're like, Jesus, you cannot be serious. And then you think to yourself, if a regular person said that to me who isn't the savior of the world, I would say, you're saying that to me as if you've never been hurt. Like, you're setting these like crazy unrealistic expectations, and it's not fair and it's not realistic at all.
Yeah. I have every Sunday during football season, I have a Saturday night homily to people who are tailgating. And then I have a Sunday mass homily to college students.
The Saturday night people are my people. Just so
No. These are like Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston, Wichita,
some of my
Oklahoma
people.
City.
I know who you are.
There's rarely someone who's cheating on you over there. But it went like this.
I know exactly who you are.
Jesus is asking us to forgive. And it's like, well, Jesus, did you ever do that? And there's this scene on Holy Thursday night where Peter, he says, I do not even know the man. And then in Greek, it says, I do not even know the man. And then Peter began, so he denies him 3 times. And then it says, and then Peter began to curse. The word in Greek is not profanity. The word in Greek is demonio, like to call down demonic cursing upon Jesus and Peter. And it says, it's a beautiful line in it. It says, and Jesus looked at Peter. Like, he looked at him, just like he looked at the rich young man and he loved him. There's this like, he looks at him and he runs away. But this is something I learned about like the Hebrew culture, that if you look away, it's like you shame them and you shun them, you're disgusted with them. You look at them and you love them. So
we still do that. Like,
even on that holy,
if you're mad at someone, you're like, I can't even look at you.
Exactly.
Get out of my sight.
That we do that. But then this is what I love about the resurrection. And this is what I told the people. I said, on Easter Sunday morning, Jesus says to Mary Magdalene. Mary Magdalene in the Eastern church is called Apostle to the Apostles. She's the first good newser to the good newsers. He says to her, go and tell my brothers. And I'm just like, wait a second. Like, he doesn't say, go and tell those people who betrayed me. Go and tell those people who abandoned me. Go and tell those people who called down curses upon me. He says, go and tell my brothers to meet me in Galilee. It's like, at the heart of who God is love. You know, even they say, like the woman says, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. In Spanish, it says, ten misericordia de mí. Like, have mercy on me from the depths of your heart. Forgive me. And so the Lord Jesus, I mean, he doesn't just like, oh, well, I'm God and I do these miracles and stuff like that. But, this stuff over here, we'll see what happens. No, he lives out all of them and proves that he is the God of mercy, compassion, and forgiveness. And he's there doing it. But then that gets transferred to us because we sit and it's. I was joking with this with some guys. I said, we make fun of our football team for losing, but how many times have you been hit by a person running at you 17 miles an hour with full pads wanting to crush your
how many
body?
times have you lost in your life?
Yeah, exactly. So, but there's that. Until we actually go out there and we're like, actually, I don't want to get run over by a 6'5" man who weighs 300 pounds. Pass. So we say these things, and then the moment comes. Then, like, does the gospel and the Eucharist take hold of our lives? Like, does the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ take hold of our lives and seize? And it says, the last Sunday's gospel, it says, take hold of our minds and our hearts so that we don't think like we should think, but we think like divine people think. It was a magnificent closing prayer. Seize our minds and our hearts. Do we allow
that was the prayer after communion?
Yeah. Do we allow the Eucharist to do that? And then do we really allow the gospel to rule our lives? Because if the gospel is Lord Jesus Christ speaking to us, then we have to. Because so last Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, I made reference to Maria Goretti's mom, Assunta Goretti. I said, if you want to find a patron saint right now because you don't want to forgive somebody or you feel like you can't be forgiven, then ask Assunta Goretti to pray for you. She's the woman. After Alessandro, the murderer, the guy who murdered her daughter, Maria Goretti, after Alessandro reports that Maria Goretti starts visiting him in jail and he has this massive conversion, Assunta Goretti then literally starts going to daily mass with Alessandro when he gets out of prison. I mean, it's well known that these two people went to daily mass and received Holy Communion together. And then at her canonization in St. Peter's Square, it's Assunta
they sat together
and Alessandro sitting together at the canonization process.
I think one thing that's important, so Alessandro Serenelli killed Maria Goretti, stabbed her 13 times.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think, he was arrested and he went to jail I think he went to jail for 30 years. Now, I don't know where in that process, like Mrs. Goretti, forgave.
Yeah. It probably wasn't instantaneously.
Like, was it? Yeah. And I think that's
forgive
where,
him day one.
So my homily last Sunday was, I didn't use that example, but for those, I think if you're listening to this and you live around here, like we had one of our parishioners was murdered.
Yeah, terrible.
His name's Sam Crawford. He's 21 years old.
Rest in peace.
And he was killed basically, kind of like for his truck. And I just thought it was fascinating, kind of all that happening. He was missing for 12 days. They found him. And then here comes this reading about mercy, when, I can't blame anyone who is not feeling mercy, but is feeling, vengeance. Mm-hmm. And so this reading comes along. And so I kind of dived in on that, just on that subject of that mercy, finding mercy is a process. I didn't say this, but kind of like easy. It's sort of easier said than done. When people use these sort of pithy, sort of phrases where they say, you know what, you just got to move on, or you got to forgive and forget.
That's bull hunky.
Like things you find at Hobby Lobby on the wall that people right next to things that say, "What happens at the lake stays at the lake." Anyway, there's these phrases,
Vomit.
that people kind of use. And I think partially because they don't have anything else to say. But then, you put the really practical stuff. Assunta Goretti, her daughter was killed. There's a moment. It happened to her. She lost her daughter, So this happened here in our community, It's like Sam dies. And that doesn't just die, he's killed. What it brings the gospel into, where they say kind of where the rubber meets the road. Which way are you going to go? So we can talk about the gospel in abstractions. And this is one of those moments in this community, for this family, for this parish. And I'm thinking, for me, where am I am I taking the gospel seriously, or am I faking it?
Yeah.
And when you say, that it ought to, penetrate our hearts.
Seize.
And our bishop says this all the time. He's got this phrase, and he didn't make it up, but he just says, Jesus is Lord. And if Jesus is Lord, then he needs to be Lord of everything in our lives. And that includes how we treat each other. That includes our family life. That includes the life of our parish. That also includes our work. That also includes sort of intimate and deep things like forgiving someone who's harmed us. And so maybe maybe you knew Sam, and maybe you didn't. But where in our lives are there still those things that hurt? Somebody has wronged us along the way, and are we working towards forgiveness? So back to Peter. I think Peter kind of thinks he's being all hotshot, like as many as 7 times. Like, look how great I am. I'm gonna go totally high. Some other wuss apostle would say 2 or 3, but I'm Peter, and I'm gonna say 7. And Jesus, totally raises the ante.
Yeah.
Not 7. 77.
Right. In the culture we live in of I think also with the cancel culture, everybody's getting canceled. It's like we don't know how to forgive people because we immediately cancel them in one way, shape, form, or another. It's not just we're going to dismiss them from the public square, but it's this person, done with you. It's like, what? Okay. So I've had this reflection this week, and it's on the feast of Cyprian, martyr this past week.
Yeah.
And they give the accusation, the governor Galerius Maximus, you have posed as the pontiff of a sacrilegious group, and the bishop answered, I have. And then it gets down, and they're trying to get him to sway, and he says, the accusation is, you have set yourself up as an enemy of Rome and our religious practices. Like, that's the accusation that the Roman emperor lays against Cyprian, pontiff, pope of the church. You have made yourself an enemy against the nation of Rome and our religious practices. Why can't we set ourselves up as an enemy against vice, revenge, sloth, anger, resentment, lust, mean-spirited, being a jerk? Like, set ourselves up as enemies against the gods.
Those vices are my enemies.
Like these are the gods of the culture of revenge and animosity and slander and gossip. Like, to see them really as the way of life of quote unquote the Roman Empire, or to see them as the religious practices of the enemy, and say, like, I'm setting myself up as an enemy against them. Like, I want to be considered an enemy against that way of life, of lack of forgiveness. I mean, it is really.
Instead, we make the enemy becomes the person we don't want to forgive.
Yeah.
Rather than unforgiveness.
Yeah. An exorcist said one time, he said, it's not that we start to think like the enemy, we actually start to act like him.
Yeah.
And all of these things are not just like, I start to think, actually, because a habit is an action, is an idea in motion, whether it's a habit of vice or a habit of virtue. So a virtue is the habitual action for the good. So I think about it and then I do it. And a vice is a habitual action, an idea that's a habitual action towards the evil. It's like, why can't we just, like me, I'm talking to myself right now. It's like, I have to set myself up as an enemy against these things.
So I think one very practical way to do that, so we talking about Mrs. Goretti and talking about Sam Crawford getting killed and like, so how do you like get to a place where you're like forgiving on the big things? And I think this is true of any virtue. And that is, okay, you want to obtain this virtue, like start in a small,
the local level.
Right. Yeah. And so you want to like get to the point where you're forgiving some major injustice against you or your family or our community. But then, like, I mean, literally, like, somebody cuts you off in traffic.
Yeah.
And you want to punch them in the face, like there's a moment to like grow in virtue, the virtue of mercy, the virtue of patience.
Yeah.
Very practical ways.
Right.
Your professor, wrongs you. Somebody in your group was supposed to do this and they didn't. And this isn't like let everyone off the hook, like no one's responsible for anything.
Correct.
But the question is like, how long do you hold on to injustices against you, and how do they affect you? I mean, so the old phrase, I've used this in a few homilies over the years, that like lack of forgiveness, lack of mercy is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And so I also want to get across, like, easier said than done, like that it's a process.
Right. And yeah, I found when I don't forgive people that resentment and animosity show up, and they then are like an ulcer to my belly and my heart and my mind.
Yep.
They're like ulcers. Like, I don't even want to see these people. I don't even want to think about them.
Yep.
When I do think about them, I want to blur it from my mind immediately. And so at the heart of it is I have to like get down on my knees before the Lord and bang my head against the tabernacle and ask for the Lord, help me to forgive these people.
Just want to be clear, I don't recommend the banging of the head.
I took it from Thomas Aquinas.
A tabernacle.
Yeah.
Don't be walking into our churches and
banging your head against our...
We have the benefit of having a private chapel in our house.
Like the other day, I just laid my chin on the altar and I looked at Jesus in the Holy Eucharist and I said, Lord, help me to forgive these two people.
Yeah. So do that. I mean, that's where it comes from. Forgiving 77 times.
Ouch, bro.
That doesn't come naturally to us. And so we go to the Lord.
Okay. Y'all have a beautiful day. Peace.